It's now my pleasure to introduce Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey to kick us off with a few remarks. Since his election in 2017, Mayor Jacob Frey has worked to lay a strong foundation for Minneapolis and has also delivered concrete results. In his first 2 years, he successfully advocated for a record-setting investment in the city's affordable housing efforts and helped spearhead landmark zoning reform. The mayor has also focused on instilling accountability in the Minneapolis Police Department and in rebuilding police community relations. He's made inclusive growth the center of his economic agenda and has continued to work with small businesses to ensure that they have the resources to compete. It's my pleasure to introduce our mayor, Jacob Frey.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that kind introduction. I'm really honored to be here as part of this Reimagining Justice Conference. And I also wanted to just briefly note before I really began my remarks that, Tom Johnson was a good friend of mine. He lived just a few blocks from me. We often went on walks together, and his legacy in many ways lives on. And Justin Terrell, you will do and are doing an incredible job. So just honored to be here with all of you. This year has been incredibly difficult for the people of Minneapolis in so many ways. It's been difficult for our city, for our state, for our country. And once again, we've been forced to confront the reality of ongoing systemic and explicit racism that really continues to haunt this nation in so many different ways. And the killing of George Floyd sort of laid bare and exposed the fault lines of some of these historic issues that have been around from generation to generation. And what we've seen is a righteous frustration and anger that precipitated the civil unrest. And in so many respects, it was an inevitable response to injustice. But then subsequently, we saw co-opting of that pain by militants set on sparking violence and creating chaos, leading to the destruction of so many of our cultural districts and commercial corridors, sadly, many of which were the same that were already hardest hit by COVID-19. And if these concurrent tragedies weren't enough, the backdrop was of this global pandemic, a health crisis, an economic downturn, 250,000 lives lost in the United States. And tragically, those that are most impacted yet again are our Black and brown communities. And despite all of this, I get up every morning and I say to myself that this is another opportunity. This is an opportunity to make transformative change. This is an opportunity to make a difference. This is an opportunity to align and channel all of that anger and frustration to getting something productive done, something real, true, transformative change. And so that's our charge amid all this hardship, even when it feels that we're treading water and facing various challenges that are much bigger than ourselves. We've got to remain the happy warriors, no matter how difficult the task. And so on the topic of policing and accountability and transformation, we find ourselves engaged in and entrusted with a very important debate about how we proceed at this point. We have many that are calling for abolition, and others are advocating to defund. And they rightly point out that we have turned to police to handle problems in society that nobody else wants to do, and issues around substance abuse, issues for people experiencing homelessness and mental health challenges. And let's be clear, on that front, they're right. We don't need a police response for every single problem, from a barking dog to a mental health crisis. And as has been embedded in our past actions and certainly will be accounted for in our next steps, we know that not every problem or 911 call requires a response from an armed officer. That's a reality and truth that I think we need to recognize. And additionally, we all understand that the root causes of crime are multifaceted. I'm sure you'll hear many speakers say this, but research clearly shows that a lack of housing stability, and the trauma inflicted because of it can lead to crime. The lack of opportunity in jobs follows suit. A range of injustices ranging from food injustice to environmental justice sets the stage for a backdrop of lack of hope. And that lack of hope can in fact lead to other issues that police often need to tackle. And so research also shows that a good policing, the kind that ensures community safety and is in cooperation with community, is essential. And data suggests that more good policing results in less crime in the first place, lower rates of incarceration, and fewer instances requiring use of force. So the inverse is also true, and we've seen how bad policing in our city can deal a serious blow to community trust and support. And that can also lead to less community safety. And so I think the question really for all of us is that we're grappling with today and going forward is, how do we get that balance right? How do we ensure that we have properly trained, appropriately staffed, and truly accountable police officers? How do we ensure that we have a properly staffed, properly trained, fully accountable police force? And I believe that the question probably begs another. The key question we must confront and seriously evaluate is whether our system of policing can be meaningfully changed. And as with any good debate, it is easy to fall into sort of the binary mindset. We need to either get rid of them or do nothing. One thing is certain, that the status quo is unacceptable. So if we're going to pursue an agenda of change, we've got to be clear-headed about the outcomes that will help us achieve the transformational change necessary to make that change real, to make that change lasting, to make it positive. And it can only be changed if it's embraced by both community and, importantly, our officers. We can implement a slate of policy changes every single day, and we're pushing through these policy changes at City Hall, but we all know that good policy doesn't stand a chance when it's pitted against a bad culture. And let's talk about bad culture, about culture, the good and the bad and the ugly, all of it. The standard for good remains our chief, who I truly believe in, Chief Arredondo. And here in Minneapolis, we're so lucky to have him as a leader, and his vision for leading with integrity, procedural justice, compassionate public safety work. It really continues to guide our goals in so many ways. But no matter how robust our reform policy agenda is, culture is about people. It's about personnel. That means changing culture means giving our chief the ability to get the wrong people out and then bring the change makers in. And right now, our chief and I are inhibited in some ways because, and I want you to remember this statistic, 50% of the time, when he makes a decision to discipline or terminate for whether it's egregious force or lying on a formal document, half the time that officer sees the decision reversed through a mandatory arbitration process. And he or she remains with the department to continue violating community trust. And as our chief has stated, there's nothing more debilitating than seeing that officer return to the department. So I want to be clear again, 50% of the time when we terminate or discipline someone for those instances, they get returned right back to the department. And so whatever side you're on, defund, abolish, reform, we need to unite around this cause. And we should have the ability to fire and terminate bad officers and to help shift that culture of the department. And, we can nibble around the edges, or we can recognize this undeniable truth. If we can't get bad officers out, our ability to change that culture, consequently, policing is limited. And the worst officers of any department, they permeate the culture like a couple of drops of dye in a bucket of water. Now you try 5 or 6 or 8 drops in that bucket, it becomes a very dark blue. And that same dynamic exists in our department. And by the way, every other department, every agency, every business in this country. If you've got a super hip and progressive pizza joint, it attracts hip and progressive servers. A forward-thinking marketing firm gets really the best possible candidates to apply. And similarly, a police department with bad actors that has created a culture of distrust or worse, racism, will attract the same candidate pool. So Chief Arredondo has done some real incredible work to share and push his values, but I'd be lying if I said his inability to remove those drops of blue dye doesn't matter. It does. And so we need that arbitration reform. We need it to happen. And we have our own work to do with the city, but I wanted to take the time in my remarks just to acknowledge how important that piece was. And as I said earlier, not every instance requires an armed response, and it's unfair to community and to police to have officers responding alone to any array of situations that they're totally unprepared to deal with. And here in Minneapolis, we recognize that investing millions of dollars into our Office of Violence Prevention, led by our fantastic Sasha Cotton, is also essential. And this department looks at community safety through a health lens, and it provides us the opportunity to confront these challenges with a whole new set of tools. It's community focused, it's public health driven, and that's a big part of what we need to be doing right now to prevent violence ahead of time. It's those relationships that help us break that cycle of violence. And the work also includes building a capacity with community groups so that we can expand our focus to so many other forms. And I'll just give you a couple of examples here of how that comprehensive approach works. One way we work to prevent violence before it begins is by working with high school coaches to talk with athletes about relationships. And this is an evidence-based model. It's shown to work in the past. So we work with coaches at North and Henry and Edison schools, and it's a program that works. Another initiative is our program that we have with a nonprofit partner, Tubman, to provide long-term prevention and intervention services to young people. And these services are from a case management and mentorship standpoint, and they help serve at-risk youth. Another piece is group violence intervention. I'm sure you've all heard about it. I'm not going to get into what that is, but it's a strategy that works. It's a strategy to reduce some of the peer dynamics that we see in the group that promotes violence, and we work to create accountability, to foster internal social pressure in community to help shift and break that cycle of violence. And then finally, Minneapolis with the U.S. That is a program that we just started this year. You've seen, I'm sure, the orange jerseys. They've done some incredible work already, and this initiative sort of complements some of the existing outreach organizations that we already have, and they can help identify and then interrupt conflicts literally as they're happening, because we know the whole point is to break this contagious cycle that is violence. And this approach is very much rooted in the power of some of our local communities. So I truly view these initiatives as complementary, and we've got to do everything possible to prevent violence before it starts. We have to do everything possible to see justice where it needs to take place, to create accountability throughout our police department, and to make the necessary changes and deep structural change that definitely needs to happen. And we also need to be looking at our whole society in comprehensive fashion. That's recognizing that housing is a right. That's recognizing that everybody deserves dignity and a job. That means increasing opportunities everywhere. That means economic inclusion needs to be at the forefront. And of course, it means that we need good officers on the street to deter some of those violent crimes as well. So I do believe that change with greater investments in social services is possible, but there are real roadblocks that do prevent us from achieving this, and I think we all need to be joined in making those changes a reality. Now, I mentioned earlier about arbitration, and here's another big issue. It's the police union. I won't talk too much about it now, and I can't because we're in the midst of negotiations, but we clearly need to make progress on that front. We need to be investing the necessary time and energy to do so, but the police union and the collective bargaining agreement, it is an impediment to change, and we need to have a full-scale effort to make sure that some of the lack of accountability and some of the barriers that they have put up are just blasted down. And so this is, I'll conclude in just saying this is the moment. We need to seize it. We have to act. The moment started by the killing of George Floyd. and the energy and wide-scale awakening that we've seen since, it cannot be for naught. That is our charge, that is our mission, and our follow-through or lack thereof is ultimately going to be our legacy. I mentioned at the beginning that we maintain our convictions no matter the scope of the challenge, and I said that I was trying to remain a happy warrior in some of the most tragic events we've ever seen. You know, watching that video of George Floyd getting killed is crushing. It should be. You know, we should feel that pain. We should make the change. And so just thank you so much for having me again here today for this Reimagining Justice Conference. You're doing the necessary work right now in holding forums just like this. I appreciate you deeply, and I look forward to partnering together to make the change that we all need. Thank you.